Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at the Goizueta Business School, and welcome to our final Business Over Breakfast in 2023. And thank you for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be closing out the year with a very familiar face to many of you, Professor Tom Smith. Tom was the original host of Business Over Breakfast and, in fact, the instigator of this webinar series. Thank you, Tom. It's really hard to believe that we kicked this off. This very first Business Over Breakfast webinar was kicked off 44 months ago in April 2019. And so much has happened since then. From there, Tom has hosted probably at least a dozen more webinars. And his focus then and now is to help us sort out what effect the economy is having for our personal lives, our companies, and our communities. The big questions remain the same. Is what's happening in the economy? Is it expanding? Is it contracting? How's the housing market? Is it strong? Is it cooling? Should I sell? Should I buy? Is it a job seekers or a hiring managers labor market? What's going on with interest rates and inflation? And what does that mean for us as individuals and as businesses? And, what's going to happen in 2024? If you got your crystal ball, Tom, just to help us understand what things are going to be like in 2024. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to share a little bit about Tom. He is a finance faculty member here at the Goizueta Business School and is an expert in labor economics, pricing, sports economics, financing, economics of the entertainment industry, and healthcare. He's a sought-after thought leader by the likes of CNN, MSNBC, NASDAQ, among others. And I understand that you've had close to 150 media events in 2023 alone. I certainly hear you quite often on the radio where you are a regular. Before I hand the baton to Tom, as I always do, I wanted to give everyone a little update on a couple of program initiatives that we've been working on. There are a few days left to register for our credit-bearing MBA level courses. These are courses that our executive MBAs and evening MBAs take, and we're able to now offer them to people that are not taking a degree, but would like to do a deep dive into a topic such as consumer behavior, emotional intelligence, marketing, and sales and business development, just for a few. These courses qualify for tuition reimbursement at most companies. And so please check them out. Registration is December 15th. The last day of registration is December 15th. And these courses start in early 2024. And as I said, for credit, for university credit. There are also shorter courses such as our Unspoken Rules of Leadership, and Jamie Turner, many of you will be familiar with, has spoken about these 4 pillars of leadership: mindset, mentoring, management, and marketing. And so this is a very short course that starts in February in a sort of a webinar, live online series of 4 sessions. So check those out on our website, and I know the team will put it into the chat how you do that. For today's session, Tom's going to talk to us. He's got a short presentation for us. As usual, please post your questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I look forward to seeing you all in the new year. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. I appreciate it. And thanks to your team, Kavita and Angelin and Pam Tipton. Pam Tipton, one of my friends way back, and she had reached out to me several months ago and said, Tom, we've got to have you on this Business of a Breakfast for December here. We haven't heard from you in a while, and we're very curious about the state of the economy. So I was like, sure, Pam. Of course, I kept her nervous because didn't RSVP right away, but yes, this has been on my radar for a long time. So thank you, Pam, very much. So I've got a presentation here. I'm gonna jump into the presentation in a second, but I do want to post this question that you guys can, let's say, comment on as we go. And really, I'm interested in what part of the economy is really making you nervous, or keeping you up at night, if you will, or if there's parts of the economy that you are comfortable with, or that you say, like, oh, this is finally broken through. I'm feeling really good about this part of the economy. So either of those, the good or the bad, if you will. So I want to put that out there. I think, Nicola, people just post as you go, or people just leave comments that say, oh, the part of the economy that's making me nervous is this, or this is the part where I feel pretty comfortable. Is that what participants are doing these
Yeah,
days?
that's right. So we've got real estate, we've got unemployment, massive layoffs, a value of the dollar, high tech investments drying up. What else? Strength of the US dollar, increased cost of basics, groceries, gas, etc. Still seeing slowness in the manufacturing sector.
All right.
So, yep, it's across the board, Tom.
All right. So this is a little, I'm not a really big fan of the PowerPoint. I like to do things, on Word documents. So I apologize if you can't see this as well. But I'm just sort of going to summarize what I'm seeing as the areas that I'd like to concentrate on, and then I'll do this for about 20 minutes plus or minus, and then just take Q&A for the remainder of the time. So there's some things that I think are highlighting the current state of the economy. So the first are prolonged periods of underemployment, particularly for males. So this is highlighted by low labor force participation rates. I'm not going to read all these things verbatim, but that's my first point. The second point here is stagnant real wages for most industries and or decreasing real wages for most industries. We've got high interest rates, although very recently interest rates have fallen, especially for mortgage rates, a little bit. And then we've got continued disinterest in returning to office for office workers. This may be one of the things that you like about the current state of the economy, and you're saying, "Oh, this is doing really well for me," but it's not doing really well for a lot of the businesses that have this huge overhead, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. So the areas that I'm going to concentrate on here for the next 20 minutes or so before the Q&A is we're going to talk about inflation, because I just saw there was 25 people who said inflation, price of goods, price of energy, price of staples, what have you. I'm going to talk about real estate. I'm going to talk about the labor force participation, including the unemployment rate, as well as wages. So inflation is the name of the game here right now. And you know that in the last 2 years, we did have experience where inflation was increasing, so prices were going up, year over year, which is how it's calculated. A year over year change in consumer price index is the typical method where it's calculated. But we saw it spike at just under 10%, and then it has decreased, and has decreased pretty consistently. Recently, we're seeing a little bit of a rebound. Inflation numbers are going to come out today, and so I suspect that they're going to be hovering right around 3 and change, 3.5%, 3.4%, 3.7%, something of this nature. I typically don't put much stake in this small change at the end where you see that it's flipping back up here. I don't put much stake in just a one period change. I would want to see what the long run trend of this, if we are actually seeing a return to some inflationary pressures, or if we're seeing more of a steady state situation. Okay. So this is, as I've seen from the chat, one of the biggest concerns of individuals, and rightly so. Inflation has real costs on essentially your buying power of your dollar. So many of y'all would have received, 2.5 to 3.5% raises last year. And what that means is that your real wage is actually decreased. So if you have 4% inflation and you only get 3% raise, then your buying power is actually decreased a bit. This is the price. Well, this is from a couple months ago here, 2 weeks ago, or excuse me, 2 months ago. But price of gas has actually settled a little bit, and so I mean, I filled up 2 days ago with gas that was about 3.55. You can find it for 3.25, 3.80, all the way in this range here. If you look a year ago, the gas was up at 4 and change. So we're actually having some deflation in terms of um, our some of our energy costs, which is good. And given overall inflation, it's easy to see that that for this part of your spending, you will actually spend a little bit less. Um, this was one of the big tax savings, if you will, or came across the tax saving during COVID. Price of gas went way down, and of course, nobody was driving anywhere, or people were driving, really short distances using very, very little amounts of gasoline. So this is always something that concerns people. Right now, prices of gasoline is very stable. Okay, and it's much lower than it was a year ago. That doesn't make people happy because it's not as low as it was, say 5 years ago. But it has been trending downwards, so that's always a nice direction. U.S. energy prices in general have trended downward in the last year, as we can see from this graph. Again, there is a short kind of one period or uptick in energy prices, and I'm trying to see if that is going to be a long run trend. If it is, I would certainly be more anxious about that. So here's some of the trends that actually I do like. Food prices at home and food prices away, if you will, at restaurants. So one of the complaints has been, it's costing me so much more to buy eggs, so much more to buy staples, milk. I mean, you can't go to the grocery store without spending $85 or $100. It's just impossible. And even if you're just saying like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go buy a couple items and go through the rapid checkout. It's not shocking anymore, although it was shocking and a year and a half ago. Something that was costing you $50 is now costing you 65. Something that's costing you 60 is now costing you 80 or $100. And you say like, this is just bananas. Well, those prices have settled quite substantially, so they're not likely to go up much anymore. They did ramp up quite a bit, and you say like, wow, we were looking at 15 to 20% food inflation, yes, but now there has been a decrease in that inflation, so it's now around 2.5, 3.5%, which is pretty reasonable. That's what the average food inflation is, about 2.5 to 3%, and so we're trending towards that mark. During the pandemic, there was lots of people who were ordering Uber Eats and Grubhub and DoorDash and all these things from everywhere else, and that was really spiking the prices. But again, those prices have been going down. In terms of the economy, because you don't just want to see a bunch of graphs, there's an interesting article I read about ghost kitchens. So ghost kitchens were restaurants that opened up that didn't have a physical dine-in space during the pandemic, and it made a lot of sense because nobody could go and dine in anyway. These ghost kitchens could offer different menu items than other restaurants. They could be specialized. A lot of them were opened by big chains, and some people noticed that there were, let's say, restaurants like a pizza restaurant that opened up inside of Chuck E. Cheese that was like selling pizza. People were freaking out about that. They're like, wait, what?
Tom, I think you're frozen.
Trends. I'm frozen?
No, not anymore.
Oh, okay.
For about
That was
10 seconds. That was weird.
Oh, okay. All right. Since I can't see anybody's face, I have no idea. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So I was talking about ghost kitchens. I don't know how much of that you heard. I apologize. So these ghost kitchens opened up during the pandemic because there was an increased need to have options for food. And but since the economy has opened back up, people seem to be less comfortable, and so the profitability for these ghost kitchen companies has gone way down, and they're starting to close them. Why is that an important element to talk about like this morning? Because there were opportunities in the market that opened up during COVID, and very smart entrepreneurs took advantage of those opportunities. However, when the market changes, the the same types of industries that were successful during the disruption may not be, and by some evidence are not, successful or competitive when you're in a different part of the economic business cycle. So, although ghost kitchens may have seemed like a really great idea, maybe consumers aren't comfortable with how that works. And so, I know this is catching a lot of people off guard. What I'd like to remind is that different parts bring about different opportunities, but those opportunities don't always persist throughout the business cycle. So that's what's going on here. As a result of this high inflation, consumer confidence has been down for quite a bit. It is starting to rebound and retrend here. And people are seeing long-term inflation subsiding. They're still unhappy about it, but they are seeing it subside. Um, so this is the forecast that I've done for inflation. We're likely to see a moderation of inflation to the Fed's 2% target. And I suspect that by Q2 of next year, we will be seeing inflation hovering around 2%. It might be anywhere from 2% to 2.75%. But I suspect that that's what's going to happen if we start trending up higher than the 3.5%, 3.7% right now. The Fed's going to slam the door on that and increase interest rate targets several more times. Currently, they have decided to put a hold on contractionary monetary policy, so they're not increasing interest rate targets anymore right now because they feel that they've got a decent control over the inflation in the economy. All right. And then here, this is the federal funds rate. This is the Fed sort of flattening rates. This is flat, and this is going to remain flat for a while, I do believe. Okay. So this is one of the things, the other parts of the story that I wanted to highlight, and that's housing prices. So housing prices spiked during, I would say, the second half of COVID. Right at the beginning of COVID, people were not comfortable with their current house. They didn't think they'd ever get a chance to buy a house again. They didn't think they'd ever go back to work. So they just bought everything and anything they could if it made any kind of sense to them. I did read an article that 70% of people who bought a house during COVID have a regret about either what they purchased, how much they purchased it, and they feel that they're locked in. They feel they got a bad deal. They've got some regrets. That's really unfortunate because it's one of our largest individual purchases that we'll make during our life, that and our education. So it's not good to find, 70% of people having regrets about their largest purchase. What it means now is people are being a little bit more cautious. So housing prices have started to fall a little bit. Okay, right? And so here's the rate of inflation based on the Case-Shiller house prices. You see that they've come down here. They're starting to spike up a little bit because there's now some more interest in housing. One of the areas that I've been particularly concerned about has been the cost of rental housing, which has gone way up. Um, conglomerates are buying up real estate and then renting it out and making it very, very difficult for younger families to jump into new homes. I was talking to my parents who came in for the holidays, and last night they flew in, and one of the conversations that came up was, what my dad paid for our house, the house I grew up in outside of Chicago, and he's paid $45,000 for the house, plus or minus, and he was able to get a gift from his mother-in-law, my mom's mom, my grandmother. They gave him a gift for their down payment, right around 10%, which is sort of a typical down. Well, was a typical down payment. But he was saying, look, you forget the interest rates then were 13%, and wages were really, 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 really low. I mean, all things considered. And so, in relative terms, he was paying something in the neighborhood of about 37% of his income was his monthly mortgage payment, which, is one of those benchmarks that people pay attention to. Right now, it is becoming very, very difficult for younger families to buy into homes because, well, one, interest rates are now starting to increase, but younger families don't have as much access to that initial capital as they did once upon a time, right? So now, if you want to put 10% down on a normal person house, let's say, right, a house in the greater Atlanta area, you're going to have to come up with $40,000. Like a normal person house might cost you $350,000-$400,000 outside the perimeter. I mean, I'm sure you can find houses for less than that inside the perimeter, and depending on where you're living, but it is becoming incredibly difficult to get that initial down payment. I mean, you got to be aware of that. What does that have to do with the current state of the economy? Well, I think that the anxiety about housing has been one of the largest anxieties that people have, and the housing insecurity, especially for younger families, figuring that they're going to have to rent their entire life. And rental cost of real estate continues to increase. And so that definitely puts a strain on younger families' budgets. And I'm sure some people are commenting and saying, "Wait, I'm part of an older family, and we still have those concerns." Yeah, for sure, no doubts. Okay. So here, like I said, the median price of housing is still falling, right? But here, this is the rental cost. There's the median price per square foot for residential housing, and here was the rental cost that I mentioned several minutes ago. Again, spiked up. We saw inflation of rental housing over 8%. It's starting to fall now, but still, if you have rental housing pricing going up by that much, it can definitely squeeze you out of your house. All right, let me talk about a couple other things here. This is for the office space. I did mention in terms of real estate and a lot of companies, wanting to get people back to the office. If I didn't mention it explicitly, I'm doing that now. So a lot of companies that have offices, like physical offices, are now requiring their workers to come into the physical office between 2 and 3 days a week. So a very small poll, probably mostly non-scientific, of people I know in different industries are saying, yeah, like I've got to go in 2 days a week, I've got to go in 3 days a week. And when asked, what's the reason for doing so, or collegiality or teamwork or what have you, but they just feel um, it's not helpful to have all of this office space if we don't have people that are in that office space. So that's what's going on. Real estate delinquencies are falling a little bit, but there's way more open office space than we've had in a long, 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 long time, right? So here the vacancy rates are taking off, and we're having a decrease in the new supply of square foot. So earlier I mentioned opportunities in the economy, and one of the opportunities that is getting a really difficult in terms of a foothold are companies that are trying to turn this industrial real estate, so like office space, into hotels, condos, because they're seeing an opportunity. They say, oh, there's people want homes, right? They want homes to be a little bit less expensive. We've got a piece of capital here that might be able to be flipped into a into a home. It's not as easy as it sounds, mostly because the office space doesn't have the number of bathrooms, doesn't have the showers, doesn't have the baths, all the things that you'd want in a condo or an apartment or a hotel. And the dollars and cents just don't work to convert those spaces into hotels or condos, townhomes, anything like this. It just doesn't work. And so, I mean, I've talked to half dozen companies that are trying this out, and they say just the dollars and cents don't work, especially with the higher interest rates right now. Maybe at some point, people will figure out how to crack that nut, if you will. But right now, people are having a very, very difficult time doing it. That points out that, I mean, not all of your resources are easily transferable between the, you know, different types of uses of those resources. We talk about a couple more things here, give you an overall view of the economy, and then take some questions. And some changes in some vacancy rates. Let's talk about the labor force here. As I mentioned, I was going to do that, talk about wages. So the unemployment rate is really low. And by this metric, you would point to the state of the economy and say, okay, well, the economy is doing very, very good. There's an unemployment rate down as low as it was, almost low as it was pre-pandemic. And you say, yeah, I mean, pre-pandemic, it was at, 3.3%, 3.4%. Now it's at 3.5%, 3.6%. It's clearly we're back to where we were. The problem with that is that labor force participation rate is still way below. So the portion of the population that could be working, right, that typically works is below. Where,
Tom,
yeah,
can you lift that chart up a little bit so we can see the date? Thank you.
yeah. So this is the labor force participation rate. So this is the percentage of people who are eligible to work in the labor force working in the labor force. Now you say, so typically it's only around 63%. Yes, typically it's 63%, and it's at 62.5%. So you say, well, this is fine. This is not a big deal. The issue becomes if the economy had grown at the pace that it was growing pre-pandemic, and how many people would you have in the labor force and how many people would be working, and what are we currently seeing? And I'm going to go backwards. Here we go. So if you take a trend of the long run employment, and if we didn't have this disruption, then our employment would continue to grow. And so you can see from 2010 to 2020, we have this really nice trend of long run employment. Of course, there are cyclical movements, right? Where people become more employed during summer and less employed during winter. But other than those cyclical movements, when you smooth it out, you have this nice trend. But this disruption pushed us into a region where there were a lot of people who were removed from the labor market. Even though people are coming back, they are now coming back at the same pace that new jobs are being added, which means that there's still about 6 million workers that would have been in the labor market had we not been for this disruption that are out of the labor market. So there's a size of Atlanta, metropolitan area, 6 million people that just aren't working, that would have been working if not for COVID, and no one knows what they're doing. No one knows how they're getting their money. No one knows what their next step is. I suspect that a lot of these workers are going to have to reemerge in the labor market because their savings is gone. So all of these savings that people took on during COVID has now been erased. It's all gone because of, inflation. So I suspect that a lot of these people who are currently out of the labor market are going to have to re-enter the labor market. There is a problem with that, and that is, let's say, 6 years ago, huge gaps in in labor force participation would be a signal, would be a flashing red light that you were not a strong, productive employee. For maybe the last 2 years, people understand that you could have been disrupted because of COVID, and you could have had spells of employment or unemployment. You had to take care of somebody in your family. And so having a resume that's full of holes would not be a blinking red light. But I think it's changing back to what it was pre-pandemic. So now people are saying, look, we've been in a steady state here in terms of COVID. People have got to get back to work. Show me, what have you done? And if you're still showing up with a resume that has lots of holes, I think you're not going to get the looks that you were at the beginning or even in the middle of the COVID crisis. So I think that these workers are starting to miss the boat, if you will, and they're not going to have as many choices. Yeah.
Tom, David asks, are these full-time positions only, or does it also include part-time?
Yeah, it actually, the way that the Bureau of Labor Statistics includes these numbers, it's anybody who is working during the reference week, but it's always included part-time and full-time positions. So if you're working for pay during the reference week, which is usually around the 15th of the month, then you'd be employed and included in the labor force. But that includes people who are working 20 hours a week, 10 hours a week, and 80 hours a week.
Okay. And this is across all industries. Am I correct with that?
That's right. This is across all industries.
Thank you.
I mean, this is a big deal because typically when you're in a state of a recession, you have what are called gaps. So there's a GDP gap and then there's these employment gaps. When you're not using all of the resources that you have at your disposal, then your economy is not firing on all cylinders and you're going to fall into an economic recession. Nobody likes that R word. So you'd say, okay, wait, does that mean that we're in an economic recession? Does it mean that we're headed towards an economic recession because we're not using all of our resources? What it means is that lots of industries are having a difficult time getting up to, let's say, full speed because they don't have the number of employees that they need in order to operate at full speed. So you might have one person doing the job of 2 or 3 persons, pre-pandemic. That is a challenge. Industries are trying to figure out how they can operate at less than 100%. And so there are, let's say, cracks in the foundation. The economy could slip into an economic recession because firms don't have ways of producing what is necessary, right? There's not the same kind of supply chain issues that we saw, let's say, a year and a half ago. But there still are a lot of firms out there that are saying, I can't get done everything that I'd like to get done because I don't have the personnel to do it. There are issues with accomplishing our tasks. If there's anything else here. So I do want to talk about real wages here. So in terms of real wages, what we're seeing is real wages are actually starting to go down because the rate of inflation on wages is lower than the rate of inflation on goods and services. Okay, so real wages are still on a downward trend, which makes a lot of people feel like they can't catch up. So there's a couple things, like this is essentially my summary here. So the economy looks good from the outside if you were just looking at a couple of metrics. Okay, right? So the metrics here are unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is low and it's steady at a low rate. Inflation is becoming lower as well. It's more normalized, right, relative to where it was during the pandemic. Okay, but it's not running smoothly. The economy is not running smoothly. The Fed is keeping inflation at bay, but as a result of that, interest rates are high, making it difficult to buy big ticket items. And then there's this serious disconnect between workers and employers. Not only are employers not able to find the workers that they want, but workers don't believe that what employers want or say that they want is really what they want. So an employer says, "Oh, I'd like you to come to the office." Workers are saying, "No, I don't think so. I really don't want to do that." And so they're quiet quitting, maybe not as much as they were before. They're just not putting in their full effort, which again leaves an opportunity, a crack in the foundation for us to slip into an economic recession. Okay. Are we moving into full-on recession territory, or are we still sort of in this soft landing territory? Soft landing is, let's say, a settling of the economy before we go into a recession. That is, that we're avoiding a recession. Things are not great, but they're not getting worse. I think we're in soft landing territory relative to full-on recession territory. There would have to be another shock to sort of throw us into an economic recession, and that shock could be an additional outbreak, an escalation of outbreaks in different parts of the world. We've got conflicts that are happening in 2 different places now. Escalation in those conflicts are likely to cause anxiety, probably over fuel, oil. And so if we have a ramp up in the price of oil, this would cause an energy shock, which could throw us into a recession in a second. But we're not there yet. And so unless we go into an economic shock, the economy is stable, but not perfect. Questions? I don't know if I can see everybody's questions here.
I've got you covered, Tom.
Okay.
All right, let me see. We've got some. Elena says, based upon what you're saying, it sounds like a great job market for those seeking employment due to the low job participation rate. Is that accurate? Because she says doesn't appear that way from the outside.
So, I mean, can you repeat the question? I think I'm hearing like job market. So it's a great job market. I'm like trying to think about these things while listening. So sorry about that.
Is it a great job market for those seeking employment due to the low job participation?
Potentially. Remember that in order for a job to be successful, there has to be what's called an employer-employee match. So you have to have what your employer wants, and your employer has to have what you want. So there has to be a match in order for things to be successful. Okay. And it can be a great job market if you find the right employer and the right job. When the labor market is in a disequilibrium, which I believe that it has been since the beginning of the pandemic, workers and employers have to be comfortable hiring people that may not look perfect on paper. But workers also have to be comfortable working for an employer that might not be their absolute favorite, absolute ideal employer. So that's the matching criteria. Once upon a time, you'd say, like, this is what I want, this is where I want to go. You'd find that opening. So people have to now readjust. They have to make a new set of criteria under which they could match. Yeah.
So, quick question to the to participants: if you can put it in the Q&A, your questions in the Q&A specifically, that would be a lot easier for me to track rather than the chat. But there was I did notice a question related to Elena's question. Are there differences in the job market attractiveness based on different industries, job types, blue collar versus white collar, for example?
So yes, like if people are saying, okay, I'm going to come out of job, excuse me, I'm going to come out of college and I'm going to go work in banking, right? Well, right now, the jobs in finance are a little soft, especially for undergrads. So people are saying, okay, let's go get a specialized master's, or maybe I'll work for a year outside of my preferred industry, get an MBA, and then reattempt. So there are jobs out there. There are lots of job openings, but I think people have to be potential employees have to look outside the industry that they were initially considering. So you say, well, I want to go into banking. I'm going to go into finance. Well, you might have to consider a short stop in corporate finance. You might have to consider a shop in a smaller uh, private equity company, right? A smaller firm. You're like, oh, I was going to go work at Goldman, go work at BlackRock, something like this. Well, maybe not. Like maybe you're going to have to work at a smaller shop for a while, which might not be ideal, but that is something you have to consider, right? I was talking about this with manufacturing companies. So manufacturing companies are having a hard time finding people to work in the finance portion of their offices. You're like, I don't want to go work for a manufacturing company. All right, you want to do corporate finance, you're going to work for Home Depot or Delta. Um, okay, but you could go work for Mercedes, or you could go work for some other machine shop, and it might not have the same kind of sexy title, but you're still doing finance, and those jobs could parlay into something for another company. Oh, there's Jennifer saying like she's working in manufacturing finance. And the fact that she says she works in manufacturing finance tells you that she has a job.
Right.
I don't know, Jennifer, if you when you came out of school and you say, "Oh, I can't wait till I get into manufacturing finance," or if you said, "Oh, like here I can do finance. Oh, here's a need for me. Oh, I can do it." Oh, no, I am not dissing your job at all. I know it's a good job because I work with these companies and they're saying, "How can I attract strong, intelligent, creative people because we want to make something," right? I have nothing against bankers, um, but right, you think about how the industry sort of sets up its criteria or its incentive structure. So banking, you have the people who are working the money in order for someone to start a factory, someone to, build something up. They're moving money around. And then you have this manufacturing company that says, um, hey, like we're actually going to produce something. Now we need someone to help us take our ideas and get the money and actually put these ideas into place. There's so many opportunities. Like here's another opportunity: is Georgia is the center of the universe for fintech generally, but payment processing. So I don't know. I read a statistic like 4 out of every 6, transactions. You go to a swiping your ATM or putting your ATM down on a machine, and other types of transactions. Like 2/3 of every transaction is being handled by a company that's in and around Atlanta. All right, you might not have thought that your ideal job was to go work for a fintech company, a Cabbage, a Synovus, and somebody who's essentially helping you move money, collect money for a retailer or some other employer. But those are great jobs, right? And so, people have to, let's say, recalibrate what they wanted and what's really there.
Tom, we've got lots of questions. One, just building on this issue of employment, regarding the labor force, are you seeing an uptick in women returning to the workforce?
Yeah, actually, more so than men. More so than men. So the labor force participation rate of females it hasn't quite reached where it was prior to that of males, but it's close. So
Right.
here's the chart of the labor force participation rate. The top line is for men and the bottom line is for women. So you'll see that the labor force participation rate of women is nearly where it was pre-pandemic. And the labor force participation rate for men has pretty much steadied out and is still a couple hundred basis points away from where it was pre-pandemic. So yeah, women have returned and men are not. Like what these guys are doing, it's beyond me. Right? They're burning through a bunch of savings that they had prior. So yeah, it might be a little bit more. It might be a tighter labor market for women. That is, they're competing with other smart women who are entering into the labor market. But I still think there are lots of opportunities. I have read that there are maybe 2 job openings, job postings for every person who's looking for a job. But there's also evidence that maybe firms are using that to test the waters. So they might be posting a job, seeing who is likely to sign up for those jobs. So the other disconnect here is that for all of the pandemic, when I was helping companies find employers or working with HR companies to help find employees, everybody was applying for everything. So you'd get, like 200 resumes and you'd say, oh, okay, so, here's an HR job or here's a job in finance or whatever else. So you have to have a degree in finance. And people were sending in their resumes saying like, well, I'm a body. Yeah, I don't have a degree in finance. I don't actually have a degree in finance. I don't actually have a degree at all, but hire me because I want a job. So HR managers are having to shift through 300 resumes, and 80% of the people don't have the basic credentials that they were asking for. And people didn't care. They're just like, I'm going to send it all in. I think that's created this delay in people now trying to fill jobs, is because they're not sure what they're going to get, and they're not sure what the CVs are looking like and if they're actually matching up. That's a huge disconnect still.
So back to the questions. We've got lots of them, Tom. We're never going to finish this. Recession 2023. What went wrong? And what's your recession outlook for 2024?
We're not in a recession. We didn't have a recession in 2023. So if you were looking for one, what went wrong was the Fed did their job, right? So I mean, I don't know how the question is worded, so I apologize. But the Fed did their job. The Fed increased interest rates, interest rate targets, and what we have then is the economy is maybe not growing at the pace that people would like, but it is growing. So we didn't have a recession in 2023. We're not in an economic recession. Not everything is perfect, but people can still get jobs. We're still adding, between 2 and 500,000 jobs every month. It's ridiculous. And so we're not in a recession. What went wrong was the pandemic. So the pandemic pushed us into an economic recession, technically lasting 2 months. But since the pandemic, everybody's going to been catching up with let's say, how much of a displacement the pandemic cost. So during the pandemic, firms could not increase their prices, even though their costs were increasing, because they would have been canceled like in a second, right? Right. So, but now they're saying, okay, now I've got to cover all of that. So I'm going to either increase my prices or decrease what I offer you, some combination. That's this shrinkflation. So I'm going to put 6 less pepperonis on a pepperoni pizza, right? So, darn. And that's all because of the pandemic. Everything that we're feeling now is still from, March 2020.
So there are some questions about pushing prices up and whether or not you think that that's still going to be possible in 2024.
So if we're going to continue to see inflationary pressures, so we're seeing such lower inflation than we saw a year ago. I believe that the Fed has got a really good understanding of how this economy is working, that I do not think we're going to see an increase in prices by very much. So I think price inflation has been mostly controlled. we still might see 3.5%, but it's going to moderate down to 3%, I believe, by end of Q2 next year.
Okay. Does an election year have a positive or negative effect on the US economy, or any effect on the US economy? What do you expect?
Yeah, typically the interaction is backwards from that. So the trend of the economy is usually a very good indicator as to what's going to happen with the election. So historically, a strong economy plays well for incumbents, and a poor economy plays very poorly for incumbents. Um, and of course, there's a guy who writes about like the 7 keys to the White House. This is one of his 7 keys. And, lots of political scientists and economists have talked about these things. Typically, if the economy is in a recession or doing poorly, then whichever party is the incumbent loses the presidency. That's in a presidential year. And that can drag down the entire ticket historically. But it doesn't always play out exactly like that, because when the economy is really good, people feel comfortable going with either party. Because when the economy is bad, they definitely want to get away from the party that's in power, right? So does the fact that we're going to go into an election year change the emphasis, the focus of policymakers? Not the Fed, because the Fed is autonomous, so they're not really taking marching orders from the presidency. Is it likely that the president is going to implement what are called fiscal policies, so lowering taxes and make some kind of spending? Not if Congress isn't okay with it. So people have a heightened awareness of it, but the election year doesn't cause changes in the economy.
All right, we've probably got time for one, maybe two last questions.
Yeah.
A very quick one. Do the metrics that you shared reflect the gig economy? I think they do, right? Because if somebody's being paid even as a gig worker, it would reflect in those charts that you had.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the BLS and are trying to capture all the different parts of the economy, which would include those. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's another series of questions around the impact of AI. What's the impact of AI on the job market? Are we seeing people leaving particular industries because of AI? Is it having, do you expect to have a near or long-term effect on jobs and participation? Any thoughts on AI?
So yes, so all the above, but there is some caution, and there people have to be careful, and I think employers have to be aware. So there's some jobs that might become, in some regards, irrelevant because of AI. So I know that my son wants to do translation. He was a German major at Emory, and he wants to do translation. And I'm thinking, okay, this might be a job that becomes irrelevant with AI. You already have Google Translate, but what if you had basically a small computer system where you were talking to somebody and it just translated perfectly into their language? You wouldn't need a third person, maybe for nuances, because AI is really terrible at nuance, right? And so that's where it gets down to. So the other part of this here, which is the pendulum on the other side, I'm sure if you haven't read it, you can Google it really quickly. There was a lawyer this last, maybe 6 months ago, who was using AI to, let's say, write up his briefs. And the AI just sort of made up cases because they sounded really good, and they were the kind of cases that would have supported his position, right? So in our state of jurisprudence, like, we need precedent in order to establish particular parts of the law. And so the AI just sort of made stuff. It didn't just sort of, it absolutely 100% made up cases to support the precedent that the lawyer was trying to make. Well, that's not good. So you say, well, wait a minute. So AI could, let's say, recreate a reality for somebody to prove a point if that's how the AI is being programmed. Yeah. So it doesn't help. Like even if you did like quality control, right? So if the AI says, you know what, it's just really inconvenient for me to, have this type of quality control, let's just rewrite the quality control that's a little bit more convenient. Like AI couldn't do that. It certainly could,
Mhm.
right? It is artificial intelligence, right? So, I mean, how it is that somebody programs the sets of sets of kind of processes that look like intelligence could determine what the outcome is. So, although I believe AI will make a lot of things a whole lot more productive, it also has to be monitored very closely. So I don't think that AI is going to eliminate a bunch of jobs, next year or next month. What I think is it's probably going to create more opportunities for people to try to figure out how AI can be used for the things that people don't already like to do. But it's certainly not going to pick corn, right? And it's not going to fix your two-stroke engine.
Well, Tom, this has been wonderful. We've got so many questions still left to be answered, and apologies for those people that have posted. But we are out of time, and so it's over to you, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom, for rejoining us for Business Over Breakfast this morning. There's always a flood of questions when you join us, and I will share with you some of the remaining questions that you didn't have time to answer, and hopefully we can get those shared, some of those shared back out. So I want to give you a prompt about what's coming next for Business Over Breakfast. Just a quick reminder, we are not going to have a live session the third Thursday of December. Instead, we'll be sharing back an email with the link to some of the fan favorites. So if you would pull out your smartphone and click on, let me get it to come up there, this QR code, there is a survey that you can fill in your fan favorites, choose 2 or 3 of your fan favorites over the past year, and we will get those links shared out to you. Then in January, we're going to be focusing on you as an individual leader. So how to make 2024 your best year ever is going to be our session on January 24th with Jamie Turner. And then joining us for the first time is Andrew Deutscher, and he'll be focused on maximizing your potential, how you connect personal energy, which includes your executive health and well-being, to driving the business and driving business outcomes. So I'm going to go ahead and advance. I hope you've had a chance to grab that QR code so you can vote for your 2023 fan favorites. Coming up next for Emory Executive Education, Nicola mentioned a couple of these at the top end of our webinar. The Unspoken Rules of Leadership webinar series is a 1-hour during lunch during the days listed here. And also we have our managerial leadership program coming up. It's a 2-module program. It dives into individual leadership as well as team leadership, and it includes a personal leadership assessment. We hope that you'll check out more about that. But excitingly, we always love being able to offer our evening and executive MBA 4-credit courses. Many companies have their tuition reimbursement program, and these qualify for those reimbursement programs. Notice the symbols next to each course listed. Some of them are all online, and some of them are in condensed version, meaning it's every night for a week and you get the course out of the way, or every night for 2 weeks. Some of those include weekends. Check all of those out at our website, and you can contact my colleague Tammy Long for any questions you might have. Tom, thanks again for joining us. Thank you to all of our participants. We love having you the first and third Thursdays of the month, and we wish you and your family a safe and happy holiday season. We look forward to seeing you in 2024. Take care, everyone.